And we are recording.
Okay. Good evening and welcome everyone to the June 28th, 2023 regular hybrid planning commission meeting. I'm Mike Murphy, Vice Chair. Tonight's hybrid planning commission meeting is being brought to you courtesy of Zoom. Welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us tonight. I want to specifically welcome our new members, Angie Battazzo. I won't call you by Angela, because then you'll think you're in trouble. And Chris Goals. Angie brings much valued experience with project management, land use, transportation, and environmental issues, all good things for this group. Chris becomes the second attorney member and is also an engineer, and he brings with us years of experience mediating disputes in federal court. The project management skills and the mediation skills should help us navigate the agenda we face this year and to generate, hopefully, a really good quality work product to send to City Council. So with no further ado, if the commissioners would please have their microphones turned on for the roll call. And Deputy City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Accuse? Here. Commissioner Battazzo? Here. Commissioner Boatsman? Here. Commissioner Gels?
Here.
Commissioner Rashis?
Here.
Commissioner Regab?
Here.
And Vice Chair Murphy?
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. There's a quorum present, and for this meeting, we continue to utilize Zoom. I will do my best to recognize you in the order in which hands are raised. After being recognized, you may then ask your questions. Our first item of business is appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the commission about issues of concern. Deputy City Clerk, is there anyone who has signed up for appearances and wishes to address the commission?
No, sir. No one has signed up, and neither do we have anybody waiting in the attendee room.
Okay. So then the first item on the agenda is the election of the chair and vice chair. And I believe Allison has a brief overview of the process for us.
Sure, I'm just going to do it verbally. So we're going to do the election of the chair first, and the process is the vice chair will open the floor for nominations. We'll take the nominations in the order that they come in, and then the voting process will start with the first person that was nominated. If that person receives a majority of the votes, they will be elected. If they do not receive the majority, we'll move to the next person that was nominated, and so on. Any questions? All right, Vice Chair Murphy, take it away.
Okay. May I have a nomination for chairperson?
I nominate Mike Murphy.
Any other nominations? This is not a very competitive race.
Do we need a second?
No, you don't need a second for nominations. Okay, well, going once, going twice. Any more nominations? Okay. Deputy City Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Gels?
Aye.
Commissioner Reagan?
Yes.
Commissioner Boatsman? Aye. Vice Chair Murphy?
I guess I have to vote for myself. Aye.
Commissioner Battazzo?
Aye.
Commissioner Rashis?
Aye.
And Commissioner Accuse?
Aye.
Okay. Now we need to elect a vice chair. And so do I have nominations for that position? Carolyn.
I nominate Adam Regab for vice chair.
Are there any more nominations? Looks like another competitive race. Okay. Deputy Clerk, can you please conduct a roll call vote?
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Regis,
Aye.
Commissioner Regeb,
Aye.
and Commissioner Gills.
Aye.
Okay. Appears to be unanimous. Adam is elected vice chair. So now we have our leadership for the year. Congratulations, Adam.
Thanks, and congrats to you.
Thanks. Okay, is there anything else we have to do on that, Allison?
Nope, that's it. We can just proceed with the meeting.
Okay. So the second item of regular business is to review and consider approving the April 26 regular meeting minutes and the June 7 special meeting minutes. Let's do them in order. Let's start with April 26. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
We have a
Second.
second. Okay, so Carolyn has moved approval and Kate has seconded. Is there any comments on the April 26 minutes? If not, there's a motion and a second. So Deb, can you please conduct the roll call vote on that?
Commissioner Gills,
I'll abstain if I can.
Vice Chair Regeb,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
Commissioner Regis,
Aye.
and Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
The motion passes. So now let's move to the June 7 special meeting minutes. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. So Victor has moved and Adam has seconded. Any comments or changes regarding those minutes? Okay. Hearing none, let's go through, let's do the roll call.
Vice Chair Regeb,
Aye.
Commissioner Batazzo,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Regis,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
Aye.
Chair Murphy,
Aye.
and Commissioner Gills.
Abstain.
Okay, the motion passes. Both minutes are approved. So our third item of regular business is the Planning Commission bylaws update. And welcome Deputy Director Allison Van Gorp to give us a little presentation on this.
Thank you. Yeah, just give me a moment to share my screen. Okay. It's a pretty short presentation, so I'll try to just go through it and then take some questions after I'm done. I need to switch that. There. Okay. So typically when we bring up the bylaws each year in June, we just do a fairly cursory review and commissioners can propose any changes that they would like to make. Sometimes we adjust the meeting times, for example, or last year, Chair Murphy proposed a change to one section. This year we're taking a different approach. We're actually doing a city-wide overhaul of the bylaws for all of the boards and commissions. I think actually because of the recommendation that Chair Murphy made last year, one of the things he mentioned was like, hey, this might be a change you want to look at with all the boards and commissions. It had to do with aligning the conflict of interest and ethics provisions with the newly adopted changes to the city code related to that. And I brought that up with the city clerk and the city attorney, and they said, hey, you're right. It would make sense to adopt this change across the board, and we probably should just look at the bylaws in general because they were pretty inconsistent. There's a lot of variability between each board and commission. So that's kind of the exercise we're undergoing now. I want to give all the credit to Deb Estrada. She has done a lot of work going through our bylaws and the city council rules of procedure and looking for ways to kind of make our bylaws consistent with the rules of procedure and also incorporating changes that have happened in state law and just kind of our current practices for how we run meetings. I just talked about that. Okay, so I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of the changes that we're looking to make in the bylaws. For the most part, this won't change anything about how the commission has been operating in recent months and years. It'll just be making the bylaws align with our practices. So for one thing, there's been some changes in the Open Public Meetings Act, and a lot of this has to do with the things that happened during the pandemic and all the meetings going online, and then making adjustments to how we do hybrid meetings now. So a physical meeting location is now required, even though like tonight, we're all meeting on Zoom. The city needs to provide a physical location where members of the public could come and view and participate in the meeting in person. And so we do that at the community center. In addition, we're required to have public appearances on the agenda for all of our meetings, just to give an opportunity for the public to comment on the business of the commission. And like I said, we're trying to align the way the bylaws are written with the city council rules of procedure, mainly for consistency and so that kind of the practices and the way we do business is similar between the city council and the boards of and commissions, just so that it's easier for the public to understand the process and how the business is done. So the new bylaws will speak to the election process like we just held tonight, training requirements for commissioners. I know our new commissioners have been really getting familiar with that in the last couple of weeks, and probably a few of you others too that needed to update some of your training. There's some procedural information about, how meetings will be scheduled, what will be included in the agenda, when the agenda will be sent out, and things along those lines. There's information about kind of the protocols of how meetings are held, using parliamentary procedures and that type of thing. We're also adding some appendices to the bylaws that give additional information on parliamentary rules, a code of conduct, and a communication guideline, as well as something about how the city uses nextdoor.com, since that is a kind of popular avenue for civic discourse in the island. And then just a bunch of housekeeping type of amendments to clarify references to code or within different areas of the bylaws, updating language, correcting errors, making the formatting consistent, and those kinds of things. We did not bring a draft of the bylaws to you tonight because they're not quite ready. Deb has been working with Andrea Larson, the city clerk, on the draft, and we've done some of our internal reviews already. However, it's now with the city attorney's office getting a legal review. We're anticipating that should be done in a couple weeks, and we'd like to get the draft into the packet for the July Planning Commission meeting so that you'll receive it in about 3 weeks in advance of the next meeting. We can review the draft at that July meeting, take questions and comments from the commission. If you'd like to propose any additional amendments, we can take those at that time. We may need to get additional legal review of those depending on how substantial they are. And then we'll bring the final version back in the September-October timeframe for approval from the commission. Any questions about that? Yeah, Commissioner Boatsman.
Thanks, Deb and staff. Nice work. I had one question. I was reviewing, I think I might have been reviewing a draft that was in a link in the packet. So I was looking in there for something called no surprise provision or something. And I couldn't find anything like that in the material. What is that about?
Yeah, it's basically the idea that if a commissioner is looking to propose a major amendment to something that the commission's considering, that you would essentially give a heads up to staff ahead of time. Like you would email us a day or two ahead of the meeting and say, hey, I'm thinking about proposing this amendment. Here's a draft, or here's the area of the draft code that I'm looking to change, something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Allison, that say communication to the staff to give you all a heads up. I thought there was a rule at the city council of no surprises for the agenda or something like that. Is that different?
I believe the council rule of procedure, and Deb can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe it's similar in that if a city council member is looking to bring something up at a council meeting, they should give staff a heads up beforehand.
Okay. So it'll be a similar run. Okay.
It's identical to the city council rules of procedures, no surprise rule.
Oh, okay. Carolyn.
So just a follow-up question. It's sort of along the same lines. So why wouldn't that heads up also go to fellow commission members or council members and so on?
Well, I think that has to do with not wanting to generate a quorum over email. And so, I think it would be, you could ask the staff, like, hey, can you forward this to the commission? I'd like to make sure everyone has a chance to see it before the meeting. And then we would do that. But we do ask that the commissioners aren't emailing the full commission or the 3 members of the commission at a time.
Okay.
Can we have a standing procedure that that gets circulated by the staff to the other commissioners?
That might make sense. We do have something similar with the city council. For example, if a council member asks a question before a meeting and a staff response is prepared, that response is provided to the whole council. So I think a similar procedure could be included here for the commission.
Would that need to be spelled out in the bylaws?
It certainly could be.
Okay. It'd be useful because there's a little confusion around that side of things. It's just been my observation.
Yeah, and it is kind of confusing sometimes because it's, sometimes there's people that are just asking a clarifying question or they didn't understand something, and it might not make sense to share it with the whole commission, just depending on, the level of detail or whatever. But yeah, I think in most cases, it probably would make sense to err on the side of just sharing information.
Thank you.
I see Deb has her hand raised.
Yeah, Deb.
I was just going to add to what Allison shared, which is with the city council, the rule of thumb is that if there's one reason why we encourage questions to be asked in advance is one, so that staff have time to prepare a response, but also when we respond to that commissioner, we blind copy. In this case, it'd be the commissioner. We would blind copy the entire planning commission to eliminate that concern about a violation of the OPMA. And it's not intended for an open conversation. It's just intended so that everybody has the same information. You're one of 7 going into the meeting.
So is there any reason to only do that if the staff responds? Beyond, Allison, your point about there being, something might be fairly minor and not necessarily need to be circulated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might make sense to have some kind of rule of thumb or a threshold, like if it's just clarifying information about a meeting date or what someone said or something like that, maybe that doesn't need to be shared. But if it's a new idea or a response to a question, or someone has sent in some red line text that they'd like to share, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Well, we're dying to read it, and I feel bad, especially for Deb, because it sounded like I started this ball rolling down the hill, and it got bigger and bigger, and Deb was on the receiving end.
I think you planted the seed, but it was a good idea. I definitely supported this idea with the city clerk's office once you suggested it.
Well, I apologize, Deb, if I...
You encouraged us to get a project that had been on our plate for a while, and this just, you know, it's, I used to work on the council rules and procedures, so this was, it wasn't as that difficult. So it's a much needed thing.
Good. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, let's move on. And our next item of regular business is the recap of the comp plan legislative review process and progress to date. And I believe, Adam, you're going to tell us all about that.
Yeah, just a moment. Let me share my screen here. There we go. So yeah, tonight we wanted to just give you a briefing on where we've been with the comp plan update. The comprehensive plan update's been underway for about a year now. So we wanted to give you an update, also for our new commissioners, a bit of an overview, since you're joining us midstream here. And so we'll walk through where we've been so far. First, I wanted to start with the very kind of basic question: what is a comprehensive plan? So the city has a comprehensive plan. It's a plan that's required by the Washington State Growth Management Act. What the plan does is it sets our vision statement at the city, and it adopts goals and policies that guide our city decision making. And the comprehensive plan is intended to be comprehensive, so it has several sections throughout it that are topic specific. So we have a land use element, we have a housing element, we have a transportation element, utilities, capital facilities, and our shoreline master program. Now, during the update, the city council has directed us to add an economic development element, which we'll be talking about a little later tonight. And also a parks and recreation element, but that'll primarily just be adopting our parks, recreation, and open space, the PROS plan, adopting that by reference. The mechanics of, there's a lot going on this slide, but I wanted to also touch on kind of the mechanics of the comprehensive plan. So we start with, we have some technical reports that are included with the comprehensive plan. And these are really like our data analyses that happen kind of before we start setting goals and policies. So this would include the housing needs assessment that we looked at in September, and also the economic analysis that we conducted prior to drafting the economic development element. And those technical analyses that look at our population and housing capacity, those feed into the goals and policies in the comprehensive plan elements. And those goals and policies, again, kind of set that decision-making directive. And then that feeds into the implementation process. So once we have our goals and policies, we have laid out kind of where the plan is going to take us in the next 20 years. And the policies describe how we're going to get there. Then the implementation is the process of making that real. And that happens through kind of three major avenues. So we have regulations. So like our land use element talks about our zoning code and where different housing types would be allowed. And then that feeds into our the actual regulations that we have on land use and development. It also, the comprehensive plan guides our capital budget decisions. So like the policies of the transportation element guide where we're going to invest money in our transportation infrastructure moving forward. The capital facilities element guides where we would spend money on capital improvements. And then we also have other planning activities. So we'll see this quite a bit with the economic development element. But the plan will outline certain programs or projects to be undertaken. And as we do those projects, as staff completes those projects, we're really implementing the comprehensive plan in that way. That's a bit of an overview of the comprehensive plan. Just to touch on some of the other smaller components of each element. So we have the comprehensive plan has an overall vision, which is a general statement about where the plan is taking us. And then each of those elements has specific goals in it that are really the objectives of the plan. And then associated with those goals are the policies of each element. And the policies are saying, these are the things we're going to do to achieve our goals. So, and then the goals are the things that we want to make happen to achieve our vision, right? And then there's also implementation actions. So those are, directives, like I was saying, to update the code in a certain way, or undertake certain projects or programs, or those capital budget decisions. The comprehensive plan looks at a 20-year planning horizon. So our current plan, we're updating, we're shooting for the update to be adopted in 2024, and it will be planning through the year 2044. And the main way that we do that in the comprehensive plan is that we set growth targets. And primarily those are, new dwelling units, the expected growth in dwelling units, and the expected growth in jobs and employment. And under the GMA, the Growth Management Act, the city is required to ensure that the plan provides adequate capacity for those new dwelling units and the new employment that's projected through the planning horizon. And so we do that through things like making sure that we have an adequate zoning capacity to accommodate those houses, and zoning capacity for those new jobs, and things like that in the plan, so that we can accommodate those growth targets. So that's a bit on the comprehensive plan, how it works, and what some of those pieces are. You'll become much more familiar with those over the next year as we move forward. Before I move on, I see a hand there.
Yeah, just while you're here, the growth targets, what's the genesis of those? I was a little confused. That they, is that coming from the Growth Management Act, or is that something that's internally generated based on, expectations?
Mm-hmm. So the growth targets are derived from the population forecasts that are generated by the Office of Financial Management, the Washington Office of Financial Management. And they do those projections at the county level. And then King County gets a growth target of X number of houses and X number of jobs based on that the projected population growth. And then King County then has a process by which that is allocated to the different cities within the county. And so the growth targets are adopted in the King County countywide planning policies. And that whole process took place in 2021 and early 2022.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn, do you have a question?
Yes, I was intrigued by your inclusion of the phrase implementation actions. And I remember seeing that, of course, in the comprehensive plan and the draft work and so on. But I'm still a bit confused about this, because I know that during our many occasions over which we have recommended amendments to the comprehensive plan over the years, we try to state things as goals, policies, but without actually specifying this is exactly what we're going to do, because those things that are what we're exactly going to do are subject to budgets and council action. So I'm just never quite clear what this implementation action means and why it's included in a comprehensive plan.
That's a great question. So I think that's one of the main things that we're going to wrestle with through the comprehensive plan process, is how specific to make those policies. In general, we try to keep them specific enough to where we know what the policy is directing. But we generally try to stay away from saying by X year, we're going to do X action, because that will then kind of create handcuffs where we don't, maybe we don't have the budget in 2032 to do, I don't know, a parking study or something, right? Like, so that right sizing the policy direction to make it specific enough, but general enough, I think is one of the challenges that we have. I mean, the implementation in general is really like an important part of the plan to be thinking about, because it's all fine and good to have a binder with a comp plan in it, but that doesn't necessarily translate into the city of the future unless it's implemented through those like projects, programs, code amendments, those kinds of things. So we have to, the specificity part, I think, is really the delicate balance that we have to strike in this process.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to learning more about that as we go through it. Thank you.
Oh, I can't myself.
Another question?
Yeah, real quick. I just curious of these growth targets likely to be tweaked in light of the middle housing bill that the state passed, or are these set and we can count on them?
We can count on the growth targets.
Okay.
The middle housing bill won't affect the target. That really affects like the capacity that we have to accommodate that target, right? So we have to have to accommodate our growth target, we have to make sure that we have 1,239 units of capacity in our zoning, that we're not restricting growth beyond that. Now we'll get into this in very much greater detail as we start to work on the housing element piece of this, because there was House Bill 1220 that was passed in 2021 that basically requires us to, with that dwelling unit target, it has to be divided up into different income segments. And so that gets a little bit trickier, but 1110 is going to interact with that. The 1239 total is not going to change, but how we have to divide that up is going to change. And we'll talk about that, like I said, you'll be tired of talking about it by the time we're done with this. So I can promise you that, yeah. Any other questions before I move on to where we've been? Okay. So the periodic review, as I mentioned, we are in the process of, we started, our scope was adopted in 2022. That really set the parameters of this project and how far we're going to go on some of these elements as we're updating. And this is a process that occurs every 9 years under the Growth Management Act. Our periodic review is due December 31st, 2024. So we have a little over a year and a half to complete our comp plan update. And as I mentioned, we adopted a scope of work. Now, the housing bills that were recently passed, combined with some of the guidance from Commerce around that House Bill 1220, is going to require a supplemental scope of work for the housing element. So we're adding some tasks in there. And we'll be discussing that with the council at their meeting on the 5th, if you want to hear more about that. But that's, we're not necessarily changing the original scope of work, but we are adding some tasks to it, and the council will be looking at that on the 5th. So far, we have completed quite a bit of work on the comprehensive plan update. We started with some public input around the economic development element last spring and summer. This included some initial interviews that staff conducted with some key stakeholders in the community, really just to kind of get a general lay of the land around economic development. The purpose of those interviews was really to kind of get some more, just some general input of what people are talking about around economic development. And then in June, we held a community workshop that was held online, and that included a small poll of the participants, and we got some input from that to kind of help with drafting this economic development element. And then in July, we held a community survey to get some more detailed input from the community before we started on the element. And I'll go into that more when we talk about the economic development element next. At the same time, we were conducting some technical analyses. I included the King County Urban Growth Capacity Report on here. That wasn't a product that the city produced, but it's a really key component of our comp plan update, because that's a report that King County produced that summarizes the growth capacity for all the cities in the county. So that's a really going to be a really helpful thing as we try to prove that we have adequate development capacity for those growth targets. We worked on the housing needs assessment over the course of last summer and into October. And that was a data analysis that looked at our projected growth and what types of needs are out there around housing. So it's really going to inform a lot of our housing element work. And then we also prepared an economic analysis with the housing needs assessment and economic analysis were both prepared by consultants. And that the economic analysis really looked at what are the economic situation. It looked at the data around our local economy here. Another piece to kind of help underpin that economic development element. We've already reviewed 4 elements of the comprehensive plan. We started with the land use and transportation elements last summer. And completed our first round of review in October. And then from October to December, we looked at the capital facilities element and the utilities element. And we're calling where we got to with that review, we're calling that the public hearing draft. That's really just a way of saying for this first round of review, we've gotten the Planning Commission input. But there will be some additional steps before the Planning Commission makes a recommendation on these elements, including some more public input. So these drafts aren't necessarily done, but they've gone through a pretty substantial first round of review with the Planning Commission. Our upcoming work, these are the items that we will be tackling in the next 9 months or so, include some additional technical analysis. So these are 2 reports that will help with our work around House Bill 1220 and responding to those, the needs of the different economic segments. That's a new requirement that was added by that bill. And so Commerce has issued some guidance, and we're going to undertake that additional technical analysis. And that will include a supplement to our land capacity analysis. So we have to do some additional, we have to look at the data a little bit more in detail regarding what types of capacity can accommodate what income segments for affordable housing. And then there's also House Bill 1220 requires that cities analyze policy for potentially racially disparate impacts and prepare a report on that. And begin to address if those racially disparate impacts are found, cities are required to begin to address those policies. So we'll be compiling a report that based on that Commerce guidance to address that piece of it. Then once we have those technical analyses in hand, we'll begin working on the housing element. This is one place where we're probably going to make some of the most substantial changes to the comprehensive plan, mostly in response to those changes in state law that have come down recently. And so the housing element's going to get a heavy touch, and we plan to start working on that with you early in 24. hand in glove with that is there's going to probably be some additional work to the land use element to ensure the internal consistency between the changes that are made in the housing element and some of those other statewide policies that have changed. And then we're also beginning tonight looking at the economic development element. This is a new element of our comprehensive plan. We've been working on it with the economic development work group for quite some time now, and now we'll be handing it off to the Planning Commission. There'll be much more on that here in a moment. One of the things that I wanted to call out here that we will address at some point is the council wanted us to look at adopting a parks zone as part of our the comprehensive plan update. And so at some point in the next 9 months or so, I expect that we'll start looking at a draft of the park zone and looking at that as adopting that during the comprehensive plan update. So as I mentioned, when we get to that public hearing draft phase for these elements, that doesn't necessarily mean that those elements are done. That's really just the first round of review. So once we get an element to that stage, or once we get all of our elements to the public hearing draft stage, we plan to hold a community workshop that will gather some input on, gather public input on those drafts. And then following the workshop, the Planning Commission will hold the tune-up meeting where we can walk through the input that we gathered at the workshop and then make changes if needed to the drafts before we go to a public hearing. And then once we get to the public hearing, the Planning Commission can continue to, until they've made a recommendation, they can continue to respond to those comments, update the drafts as needed based on the comments that we received at the public hearing. This process is kind of intended to make sure that we've addressed as many comments as possible prior to holding a hearing, and that we make sure that we're also getting public comments throughout kind of the drafting process, heading into you making a recommendation. And then following the periodic review, so once we update the comprehensive plan element, we will go through a process of implementation. And some of these elements have a really specific process for implementation. Specifically, the transportation element is implemented through the 6-year transportation improvement plan that Public Works prepares each year. And that's a rolling 6-year plan that gets updated each year of transportation improvements. So, you know, adding a bike lane or restriping a road for safety, those kinds of things, that all filters into that 6-year TIP. And the transportation improvement plan is something that's established in state law. So it's a pretty rigid system for implementing that transportation element. Capital facilities is a similar process, but it goes through the capital improvement plan process. So the city adopts a capital improvement plan each year. It gets updated as projects are completed, and that implements our capital facilities element. The land use and housing elements, typically that requires some development code amendments. Where depending on where we end up with the housing element, we may need to make some changes to our development code to make sure that our development code is consistent with our comprehensive plan. And then finally, the economic development element includes an implementation plan. When we were drafting that element, and we'll get into it in a second here, but when we were drafting that element, we included some policies in there that were specifically directed at implementation to make sure that we were going to accomplish that plan. And so part of that is this implementation plan process that we'll talk about in a minute. So that concludes my presentation on the comprehensive plan. I turn it over for any questions.
Carolyn.
Yes, the development code updates. independent of those which might be required from updating our comprehensive plan, development code updates, I think, were included in the work plan for this year. And not only those just that were requested in the docket, perhaps, but other development code updates. Where is that project at present? It's still ongoing, or?
Sorry, I missed the question. So you're asking about the docket process and where those are at, or?
Well, perhaps I'm confused in the way I'm putting it. But I thought that we had a development code update project going on in 2023. Now, I realize some of those things would be docket requests, but I think some of them are staff generated or other generated changes to the development code, maybe that don't come from the docket process. So, and I understood the last time I checked on this, internal work was going on in this to prepare draft amendments. And I just wondered if that has been delayed or is still ongoing.
That's still ongoing. So those development code projects that like council has asked us to do or have been added to our work plan through the docketing process, that's really a separate project. So for a good example would be the SMP amendments that we've been working on the last few months. That was something that was docketed and we've moved forward with in the process. And that's not really part of the comprehensive plan update overall. So there's two separate things there. Really, we won't be in implementing our comprehensive plan update. We will only be making those development code amendments that are spelled out in the comprehensive plan and are needed to maintain that consistency once the plan update is adopted.
Okay, well, let's see. I guess I did understand that. I mean, is it not possible that staff proposes development code changes that are not necessarily been through a docket process yet, and that those might be currently being developed for presentation in the next docket process? I think I exchanged mail with Allison about this, as a matter of fact, but maybe she can help us with this question.
Are you referring to the residential development standards code updates?
Yes.
Okay. So that work was initiated over the last couple years, although it's been progressing slowly. And then during the legislative session this spring, we paused that work because there were so many bills under consideration that would substantially impact our residential zoning. And now a couple of them have indeed passed. And so HB 1110 and 1337, among others, have new requirements that need to be adopted into our development code by next summer, by 2025. So that project is ongoing, but it now needs to incorporate some substantially new, larger components based on the state legislation. And so we're trying to roll together some of the changes that the city was looking to make prior to this legislative session with all these new mandated changes. And so most of that work is going to be under review by the Planning Commission and the City Council after the adoption of the comp plan. There is going to be some staff work going on over the next 18 months or so, kind of behind the scenes, but that'll be brought forward to the commission after the comp plan work is completed. And it'll be one of the first steps to implement the housing element.
Okay, that helps a lot. I kind of had the impression that maybe that's how things had gone, and now it's clear. Thank you.
Yep.
Kate?
Yeah, I've got two questions. I think kind of tagging on to that last one, since we're on the topic, we did have that housing work group. And I have concerns about this economic development plan going ahead of the housing work group, or not having the opportunity for that group to convene and for that work group to maybe have some discussion about this economic development plan. And I'll save some of my comments about that for when we talk about the economic development plan. But it just seems like those laws that were recently passed really have an impact on some of the key themes that were brought up in public meetings, and even in the goal 5, have a skilled workforce central to the health of the business ecosystem. Housing affordability is paramount to the types of jobs that are available in our community. And it just seems really presumptuous to move ahead with this economic development plan without having any kind of a sense of how that's going to roll out. You know, I don't see any ties in this economic development plan with housing. So without getting into too much detail about that, what's in the plan, economic development plan right now, I'm just wondering how will, I don't see those laws that have passed informing the economic development plan. So is that in the comp plan 7 years from now? And is there an opportunity for the housing work group to get together with the economic development work group before this economic development item is done?
There's a lot of questions there. I'll start with the first.
I just sped read the economic development plan, and this just came. I was just like, whoa.
Sure. So the housing work group is, for the new members, the housing work group is a work group that was formed when we adopted our scope of work. It was composed of 2 planning commission members and 3 city council members. And the purpose of that housing work group is to review the housing element prior to the planning commission's review. That work got paused when we realized that when the guidance from Commerce came out last fall around House Bill 1220, and then also as we were looking at what was happening in Olympia, we wanted to pause our work on the housing element writ large, so we could wait and figure out what happens at the state level. For the other piece of the question, the housing work group will come out of that hiatus as we begin working on the housing element this fall. So that work group, while it has been a long time since they've gotten together, is still a thing that exists and will produce a work product. In terms of reviewing the housing element for consistency with the other pieces of the comprehensive plan and the economic development element for that matter, we have built into our process an internal consistency review, so that when we get to that, once we have those first review drafts or the public hearing drafts of the elements, we'll then look at how those fit together as part of a comprehensive plan. So all of our elements in the comprehensive plan have to be internally consistent. So we can't have a housing element that says one thing and an economic development element that's way off in the weeds somewhere else. I think that I don't know, there isn't a plan currently for the economic development work group to get together with the housing work group to look at the economic development element. I think our intent with having those work groups was that they would each be kind of working on their specific element piece of it. I think as we work with the housing work group in the fall and early winter next year, I think the work group can rely on staff to do some of that additional kind of bridging the gap. And then if we find that we need to, we can see where we're at that point. But I think the short answer is no, we're not planning to get the economic development work group into a meeting with the housing work group, but there's some other things that we can do to coordinate that work.
And it's kind of an iterative process. Like, we're producing each of the elements, then we'll bring them all together. We'll get some more public feedback. The commission will have a couple of opportunities to go through the comp plan as a whole, with really that eye towards the internal consistency and making sure everything works together. And so that would really be the point when we can work on, are there any things that just don't seem like they're quite fitting together or aren't supporting each other, and do we need to make some additional changes?
Okay, so to borrow Adam's phrase, then this is the first bite at the apple for kind of looking at that, maybe from like the Planning Commission has that more holistic perspective than maybe the Economic Work Group. And so if these concerns come up, we should be giving you comments on that now and make them specific, not meandering trains of thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is why we give you like a couple of weeks to get your comments together. So thanks.
And Kate, we'll get to, you know, the job of reconciling all those things when it all comes before us.
Are there any other questions on the comprehensive plan update? All right, well, let me get my presentation for the next item.
Adam, do you want to segue right into the economic development element?
If the chair's ready to move along the agenda, I'd be happy to.
It appears there's no further comment or question, so I think you're back on.
All right, let me get that pulled up here. All right, so now we'll take a look at the first draft of the economic development element. And our purpose tonight, I just want to give you an overview of that draft and the implementation plan. The Planning Commission just got the draft yesterday afternoon, so it's I'm not looking for comments right now because I realize you all have need time to review it. So we'll just give you kind of a flyover on this and field some general questions on the elements and hopefully get you prepared to head into the comment period on this draft, ready to weigh in. So to start out with, our economic development element is a new element of the comprehensive plan. When we adopted the scope of work last year, Council directed us to undertake writing a new element. This and housing are the two pieces that are the most substantial, that are getting the heaviest touch in the comprehensive plan update. And the purpose of this element is to set our goals and policies to guide our economic development decision-making in the future and kind of coordinate our economic development efforts. The element details the projects and programs that the city will undertake in support of the local economy. So these range from things like pilot programs to code amendment, code audit programs. And this first draft, as we mentioned earlier, was prepared by the Economic Development Work Group. They put in a ton of work in the last year working on this element to get the draft to us today. Looking at that process, so we, as I mentioned in the last presentation, we conducted some public outreach in the spring and summer of last year, prepared that technical report, the economic analysis at that same time. And then in October, the work group began working on this draft of the economic development element. We just this Monday, the work group completed their recommendation. So it's been through quite a bit of review so far. There are three main components of the economic development element. There's an introductory text or an introduction, and then that's followed by the goals and policies. And then there's this third component that's the implementation plan. And that's something that won't be adopted it won't be adopted into the comprehensive plan, but as part of our implementation of the comprehensive plan update, we'll have that implementation plan probably approved by resolution following. And that's just to allow us the opportunity to update that implementation plan every year without running into some GMA limitations on that. So the introduction is the first section of the element, and this section is really, it's kind of a narrative text that's establishing that the context of what gave birth to this economic development element. So what are the things that we're trying to address with the element? What's the current conditions in the city that led to these goals and policies? That's helpful for us as planners when I pick this up again in our next periodic review. I'll know kind of where these policies came from, but they're not necessarily like regulatory. So we're not bound by, if one sentence of the introduction says one thing, we're not bound to that thing. It's more of, again, it's more of setting that context. The introduction of the economic development element includes a discussion of and summary of some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that came up, particularly in the public input that we received. Some of the things that were highlighted relating to strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Following that introduction are the goals and the policies. And there are 13 goals in the economic development element. And these are, again, they're statements of what we're aiming to achieve with the element. So for example, the goal 1 of the element is the city of Mercer Island actively fosters a healthy business ecosystem. So that's describing kind of where this plan is taking us. And then associated with those goals are the policies. And these are detailing those approaches, the things that we're going to do in pursuit of that goal. So the example I included here, we have goal 1, the city of Mercer Island actively fosters a healthy business ecosystem. And then as part of that, one of the strategies that we're trying to do to foster that healthy business ecosystem is to establish a local business liaison position on the city council that would act as a point of contact for the business community. And so that policy is not the only thing that we're doing toward that goal, but it's one of the steps that we would take. And then following that, so there's an implementation plan, and this is the process by which projects from this element will then be added to the work plans for the different departments in the city. And those implementation actions that go into that implementation plan, those are drawn from the policies of the element. And the intent with this implementation plan is that it will be updated each budget cycle so that we make sure that those projects and programs that are added to the work plans are adequately funded. So we're considering the cost at the time that we're doing that. That kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, making sure that our policies aren't so specific that we end up getting kind of handcuffed. This implementation plan will give the city council the opportunity to decide on what projects to add to the upcoming work programs based on the resources that are available to do those projects. Well, before I move to our process, is there any questions on that section? Doesn't look like it, so we'll move on. So our process for reviewing this element, so you have the memo, and the first draft was sent to you yesterday. We're asking for your first round of comments by the 12th. And then at the July meeting, we'll take a look at those comments and decide whether or not to make changes to the draft in response to those comments. And then from there, and this is very similar to the process that we used with the land use element and the transportation element. So once we get your comments and the Planning Commission has had a chance to respond to those comments, we'll update the draft and provide that updated draft to the commission. And then you'll have another touch on it in September, where you can review that draft, and if necessary, you can make additional amendments, or we can take additional comments. And then if we need to, we can come back in October for a third touch on the element to get it to that public hearing draft phase. Again, even once it gets to that public hearing draft, that's not the final draft. As I mentioned in the last presentation, we'll have a workshop in 2024 And then we'll have the tune-up meeting following that. So if we find that at this point that we need to make, changes to, I don't know, the policies under goal 7 of the element, we could do that at the tune-up meeting too. And then we would move to the public hearing and the final recommendation. So that's my 30,000 foot overview of the economic development element. I think at this point, really what we're looking for is for you to take some time with the draft, put together your written comments and send those to me. And I'll put those together and we'll look at them in July. Other than that, I would take any questions.
Angie.
Thank you. Just confirming, written comments only go to you, or do they need to be copied to anybody else?
You can just send them to me. Yeah, and then I'll distribute them to the Planning Commission so that everybody has them. But to avoid those OPMA concerns, it's best to just send them to me.
Okay.
Hey.
Thanks. Can you do the thing you did with us with the other elements where you tell us about 7 times in this meeting when the deadline for comments to be returned to you is? And then my other question kind of relates to my last question. I'll try to simplify. I'm wondering where do so we've got these different elements that are siloed, but when we're talking about downtown where these elements integrate, it's almost like some goals might be stated as multi-benefit goals or multi-element goals. Is there a place where those live, and how should we package comments like that so as not to be sort of obstructing the purpose of this process?
So generally, if we have like a topic that touches on like several different elements, we'll try to have goals and policies that address those topics in both places, but tailored through that like economic development lens or through that housing lens. And also, thanks for the reminder, the deadline or the comment period ends on the 12th, July 12th. That's not a hard deadline, but it would make my life a lot easier if you can get the comments to me on July 12th. Yeah. But I think so for example, if there's a housing issue that we need to frame as an economic development issue, then it needs to be, that could go in the economic development element. But if there's like an economic development issue that we need to frame as a housing policy, then that would go in the housing element. So that's more or less. And then there's also that internal consistency review step where we have to make sure that our comp plan doesn't conflict, that we don't have a land use element that says we're going to have no new houses, and then we don't have a housing element that says we're going to have 1 million new houses. So we have to like reconcile those elements in that way. I hope that came across as a ridiculous example. We're not going to have either of those.
Well, if you read the public comment, it doesn't. Sounds like a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
I just have one that's not specific to the economic plan, but are our 2 planning commission members, because I don't recall who is on the housing group. I recall it was you, Kate, and Carolyn. Okay, so you're still there. You just haven't met.
Not for a while, yeah. We're expecting to get that group together probably in October. We're going to spend, well, depending on the council direction on our scope of work supplement, we're planning to spend the next couple of months like getting prepared for that work group getting started again. And that would be those technical analyses that I was talking about. Yeah. Right. Any further questions?
I think you're good. Thank you very much. That was a great overview, and you know, didn't abuse too badly all the hard work that Victor and I did on that group.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hats off to Mike Murphy and Victor. That was a lot of meetings, a lot of work.
Yeah, you know, Victor had a lot of really good input into that process based on, you know, his obvious areas of concern and interest, and it was very helpful, I thought, to the entire process.
And Mike is being very modest because Mike had a large contribution as well, and he was actually a very great voice of reason in the process. So it was definitely a team effort.
Okay, you're free to go, Adam. Now we move on to other business. I believe, Allison, do you have a deputy director report?
Just only the briefest thing, just to remind you all of the upcoming meeting dates. So we are meeting again at the end of July, the 26th, I believe it is, and there's no meeting in August. So the city has a citywide legislative recess and no council or board and commission meetings in August. And then we'll meet again at the end of September. So just make sure your calendars are updated, and that's all I have for now.
Okay, that's easy. Is anyone planning on being absent on the 26th of July? Commissioner Goals.
Not planning, but I'm going to be in Ecuador, and depending on Wi-Fi and what I can figure out, it's possible I'll have to miss it, but I'll be trying, and I'll keep everybody apprised of what my plans are.
Angie?
Unlike Commissioner Goltz, I'll be in the middle of nowhere finishing my last 200 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail, and I just cannot promise you that I will find any signal anywhere. So as eager as I am to jump in and have comments and discuss my comments on the Econ Dev Plan next month, I'm going to have to just check back in with you when I get back.
You know, this is a long process, and I'm sure that you're going to have more than your share of opportunities to weigh in. Okay. Chris?
No, I'll put it back down.
Okay. All right. Anything else that for the good of the order? Kate?
I just want to make a comment for the good of the new members that this is not a normal meeting for us, and we are typically going until 10, if not midnight. So enjoy the honeymoon, and we'll see you next time.
Carolyn?
Yeah, I thought the presentation tonight was so very helpful, and wondered if we could get that sent to our email. Adams, your presentations would be really great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was also going to comment on the nature of this meeting. This is a good introductory session for the new members because it's normally not like this. There'll be much more meatier topics to engage in and to discuss, and but I think this group has been really good over the years, and you know, dive into these things as deeply as we're able, and it ends up working quite well. The council doesn't always appreciate our labors, but that's just the way politics goes. So anyway, if there's no other comments, and there being no further business to come before the Planning Commission, time is now 7:15 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned in record time. As a reminder to the commissioners, please stay seated until the city staff has terminated the broadcast. Have a good evening and a good 4th of July, and thank you for joining us.